Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, April the 4th, 2025. So it's all a bit of a disaster, isn't it? So I'm making this video, although I say it's Friday, I am actually making this video on a Thursday, at least Pacific Standard Time, and looking at the markets just before I did this recording. The stock market wasn't open, but looking at other markets, it all seems a bit disastrous, doesn't it? Following Trump's Liberation Day speech or announcements of tariffs on the White House. And everything is collapsing. Oil is collapsing, the dollar is collapsing, even gold is collapsing. So there probably is a great feeling of doom and gloom out there if you are following the markets. Though if you do a lot of driving, there, at least in America, you should soon find that prices at the pump are starting to fall because of oil prices, and oil prices really are going down. But what is actually happening astrologically? And in this video, that's really what I want to focus on. I want to look at the astrology of Trump's announcement, which took place 4 o'clock in the afternoon, local time, on Wednesday the 2nd, April the 2nd, and I haven't had a chance to really analyse it. And want to look at how it affects other charts, how it affects Trump's chart, and perhaps also give some consideration to the question of, how bad is it? Because right now things are supposedly really bad. And I should make it clear that I am not an economist. Trump's not an economist either. But economics is certainly not my strong suit. But before I go into all of that, oh, by the way, I also want to look at the fact that Uranus is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint at the moment, and that is also a big deal. And I think it's actually an important part of what is going on in the world right now. Anyway, before I look at all of that, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching of today. So even though I'm making this video on a Thursday, this video is really focused on the astrology and the I Ching of Friday, which is Friday, April the 4th, 2025. So here is the chart for Friday, set for noon in New York, and the moon is still in Cancer. There it is. Moon is at 9 degrees Cancer. And if you look at the sun, the moon is applying to a square of the sun. So that means we're coming up to a first quarter moon. So, so we had a new moon. I think that was on. When was it? March the 30th, I think it was, or was it the 29th? I think it was March 29th. We had a new moon, and now we're starting to see how the lunar cycle is developing. And you could say, with the first quarter moon, we're beginning to take in Trump's April the 2nd announcement, his Liberation Day, and that's certainly having a big impact on the world. We're seeing the results of the new moon, the first results, and I think in this case, this first quarter moon really is starting to work out. And aside from that, the moon in Cancer doesn't make a lot of aspects. I mean, it makes some trine aspects later in the sign, but that's more about the weekend. So we perhaps have to consider other planetary aspects. For example, Saturn is sextile Uranus today. There's Saturn is at 2456 Pisces. Uranus is at 2456 Taurus. So we've got Saturn Uranus sextile, and Saturn sextile Uranus, it's an outer planet aspect. It's about the collective, and it's it's tense. It is a sextile, though. So the question is, do we focus more on the fact that it's a sextile, or more on the fact that it's just Saturn and Uranus having a contact? Now, if you were to look at it from the viewpoint of, say, Donald Trump, he would regard that Saturn sextile Uranus as being very fortunate, because Saturn sextile Uranus is, if you like, being in control of I was going to say rebellion. I don't know if it's quite a rebellion, maybe a rebellion against the global system, but certainly a control of the revolution. So Uranus is a revolution, Saturn wants to be in control, Trump wants to be in control. And as far as how we experience this Saturn sextile Uranus, if we're trying to be positive about it, we could say to ourselves, well, it's an unstable world in which we're living, but maybe with that Saturn sextile Uranus, we can do something to actually harness it. And we also have Mars sextile Uranus. So Mars sextile Uranus, again, you've got the same issue. Do you regard that as a Mars-Uranus contact, or do you regard that as being a sextile aspect? Mars sextile Uranus, good with machinery, good with technology. You can do dramatic, even violent things, and maybe it will work out. But Mars-Uranus as a pair can be about accidents. And when we put Saturn sextile Uranus together with Mars sextile Uranus, we have this midpoint, Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint could be problematic. If I have time, I want to look at this midpoint configuration. It's not just any midpoint configuration, it's a direct lineup. Uranus is exactly on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And this could be dangerous. Mars and Saturn is about death and destruction, or at least it can be about death and destruction. Turning to what, for example, sorry, my papers are going everywhere. Forgive me for that. Okay, so let's have a look at what Vita says about Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And so he says Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, sudden actions which separate, violent separation and death, sudden death. So that gives you a bit of an idea. It's not necessarily a fun midpoint combination. It's not about our sudden death. It's possibly about sudden deaths that we read about. It could be about the news. It could be about accidents. And later in this video, I will give a bit of consideration to what that might mean in greater detail, this midpoint configuration. We also have a couple of aspects which are exact tomorrow that are not actually exact today, which are effectively exact. I mean, they're close enough. We've got Venus trine Mars, Venus in Pisces trine Mars in Cancer. At least I think that's exact on Saturday. It might be Sunday. Certainly over the weekend, Venus is exactly trine Mars, and that's a good aspect. It's charismatic. It's allows us to be appealing. And additionally, we have got Mars trine Saturn. And I've already said that Uranus is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, Mars trine Saturn. It may allow us to get things done in a very focused way. But whenever you see Mars and Saturn linking up, you have to be a little bit careful. You mustn't forget that those two planets are connected, or can be connected, with death and destruction. And so if they're in trine with each other, then that death and destruction may come easily. So that is the picture from the New York perspective. Let's just quickly look at it from the perspective of Sydney. I put Sunday there. That's just a mistake. I meant to say Sydney. But anyway, this is a picture for Sydney. And the moon is earlier in the sign. If you noon Sydney time. The moon is at 1 degree Cancer. So that does mean that if you are in Australia or New Zealand, particularly New Zealand, this morning the moon might still be in late Gemini. So there could be a somewhat different experience this morning if you're up early, especially, with the moon maybe making squares to Mercury and Venus. So those squares between Mercury and Venus, that might be about what you say. Moon square Mercury this morning, you might say something you didn't mean to say, or you might write something or send an email or a letter, and then in hindsight you realize that that wasn't such a good thing to do. So there's a bit of a difference, but for most of the day, if you're in Australia or New Zealand or Eastern Asia, the moon will be in Cancer. And here's the heliocentric view. So heliocentrically, Venus is still opposition Chiron, and with Venus opposition Chiron, we might be tempted to do things differently. And if we do things differently, not everyone is necessarily going to approve, but we might just have to do it anyway. So we do perhaps need to think about how our behavior impacts other people. If we're too much of a maverick, we might cause disruption, and people might question who we are and whether or not we can be trusted. But sometimes things just have to be done. And Mercury is making a sesquiquadrate to Jupiter. I mean, Mercury is a fast-moving planet. It's this Mercury sesquiquadrate Jupiter is not going to last for too long. But while it's around today, we're trying to say as much as possible, or some of us might be, but are our words going to hit the right note? There's just a possibility that we say a little too much. So we have to be a little careful about what we say, and we mustn't necessarily exaggerate. So, those are a few thoughts about the heliocentric picture. I don't think heliocentrically that things are especially dramatic. So let's now look at the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday. I may be recording this video on a Thursday, but these forecasts are for Friday. For Friday, April the 4th, 2025. Aries. Aries, it's quite a hectic day, and you probably don't want it to be especially hectic, with the moon moving through Cancer, moon moving through Cancer, your priorities are close to home, and you want to, as far as is possible, create some stability for yourself. And you may even feel that you're lining yourself up for the weekend. It's Friday, things are slowing down, and you just want some peace. And with the first quarter moon coming up, you've got the sun in Aries, moon in Cancer. That might be your response to things. Things have been difficult, or certainly hectic, and now you just want some perspective on the matter. But we do have to consider what is happening with Mars. Mars is making a sextile to Uranus. Now, this Mars sextile Uranus, it's relatively slow moving. It's not just about today. You have probably been feeling it for the last few days. I think you'll continue to feel it over the weekend, but it is exact today. And so with Mars sextile Uranus, you might try to be happy and satisfied and secure. But still, you're thinking about what you'd like to be doing. And if something happens that you weren't expecting, you're going to want to respond to it. You're not going to just want to just look the other way or pretend it didn't happen. And if you want, you're able to have a dramatic impact. Possibly an impact for good, though if you don't think things through, it could have difficult consequences. Though Mars sextile Uranus, there could be a financial dimension to that aspect. It may be that something happens financially, and you feel that you absolutely have to respond to it. Of course, from the perspective of the markets, things really are happening financially. So all of us are going to, or many of us are going to feel financially impacted by Trump and his tariffs and what that's going to mean for wherever we're living, whatever country we're living. So that may be one aspect of Mars sextile Uranus. Additionally, Venus is making a trine to Mars. And this Venus trine Mars, it is exact over the weekend, but I do think that you're picking up on it. And this Venus trine Mars, I think, is a fortunate aspect, and it allows you to perhaps smooth some of your rough edges. I mean, we've all got rough edges, and Aries can have rough edges, particularly if Aries is in a hurry. And so you can maybe temper the way you present yourself and act in a way that other people can deal with. And that Venus trine Mars does give you a certain amount of charisma. People will notice you, and they will find you to be an interesting and exciting person, and yes, an attractive person as well. So you do make the most of that Venus trine Mars, and you don't have to go over the top with it. You don't have to make a special effort to be attractive. It's quite subtle. So wherever you are, there's something about you that just people like. Unless, of course, you're too abrupt. You could be, but I don't think that you have to be. And additionally, Mars is making a trine to Saturn, and this Mars trine Saturn could, in many respects, dominate the next few days. And Mars trine Saturn allows you to be very disciplined. If there's something that is important to you, something that you just want to sort out, then you can do it. And you can be cold if you want to be. If you feel that other people aren't important, even though you yourself are quite charismatic at the moment, but if you feel that other people are important, you don't want to be disturbed, you can be tough. And you can really sort of concentrate on the things that matter and really cover a lot of ground in a somewhat slow and grinding way, but you get there in the end. So there's no need to be impatient. And so be systematic and be methodical, Aries, and don't do anything dramatic or drastic. There's a temptation to do that, certainly, with Mars sextile Uranus, and that might be appropriate for short periods of time, short bursts maybe, but longer term, just keep grinding away. And I do think as you move into the weekend, you'll start to realize what can be achieved. Taurus, there is a trine aspect between Venus and Mars over the next couple of days. And this Venus trine Mars does make you quite dynamic. You can be noticed, and additionally, people will take into account what you think and what you believe in. So there's absolutely no need to feel ignored. And if you do feel that you're not being paid enough attention to, well, just speak up. You can do it. And if you do say what's on your mind, then people are going to listen. So, don't just accept things as they are. You can certainly get noticed. And the moon moving through Cancer, it's actually making a square to the sun. Okay, that square sort of continues through until Sunday, because it's the first quarter moon, and things may have been building up since the new moon, which new moon I think was on March the 29th. And so since that new moon, there has been a build-up. And now, Taurus, you feel that there might be just something that has to be said, or something that you just have to do. And when I say have to do, that could be about somewhere you have to go to. There is no choice. You have to pay somewhere a visit, maybe pay someone a visit to resolve something. And it's been building up over the last week, and now you know what to do. And whatever the social complications, if there are any social complications, it may have nothing to do with other people. It just may be a visit that has been building up. But whatever is going on, you can act in a way that is pretty dynamic, and people are going to like you and appreciate you, especially if you make the effort. And additionally, you will be able to get to the point, and you won't waste time on sort of idle chit chat. In certain quarters, you might seem slightly abrupt, but that's only because you know what's important. And Taurians, are always like that, or should be like that. You get your priorities right, or at least as far as you're concerned, and you don't want to waste time on things that are trivial. Additionally, I should say that Venus is starting to make a conjunction to Saturn. Venus is only just over a degree from that conjunction to Saturn, and that does allow you to very much control the way you present yourself. You're running a tight ship, and you know exactly what you want to give out, what information you want to present, and you're pretty aware of time at the moment. And you know that you've got a limited amount of time. And yeah, it might be that we're sort of moving into the weekend, that you can be a little more relaxed, but I don't think you're going to be so relaxed, and time is always of the essence. And I don't think you're going to want to give anyone sort of more time than is necessary. So that does make you efficient, but you also have to use your attractiveness and charm. So endings have to be negotiated. They're always a problem, endings, aren't they? I'm very bad at sort of ending conversations. Maybe that's because I've got Taurus rising. So I'm arguably talking about myself here as well. So how you end conversations, how you end meetings, it's going to be very important. And perhaps you should prepare your endings. How do you end things? You're ending emails. I find that really difficult, ending emails. I come up with these stock words. I say something and then I try to come up with a word. Anyway, I like to use that word anyway. I try not to use that word anyway, to sort of so that I can get to the point that I want to end this email. That is a word I perhaps overuse. So Taurus, do negotiate those endings, and it is a day when you can really get things, make things happen. And I think that you can utilize the planetary energies. Planetary energies right now are a bit tough, but I don't think that need be a problem. In fact, you can probably take advantage of the situation. Gemini, Mercury is still up there, still in Pisces. It's still conjunct the North Node. In fact, I think Mercury is closer to the North Node today than it was yesterday. And from from your perspective, that is what counts. And Gemini, you really know what you should be doing. You have a very clear sense of destiny at the moment. And it's a destiny but you might not necessarily be comfortable with. But if you're honest with yourself, you do know what you should be doing. And that means the moment you're wasting time, the moment you're distracted, you'll know. So stick to it, keep focusing, and you might feel that, oh yeah, but Mercury's in Pisces. It's difficult to concentrate with Mercury in Pisces. Mercury is fallen in Pisces, but it's okay. You're aware of how you can be distracted, completely aware, but if you keep going and you try your hardest to look for new things to stimulate you. But when I say new things in the same direction. So you keep going down the road, and you're able to do that because you find new challenges. And so don't swerve, don't change your mind. Just keep going. And if you run into any obstacles, you can use the power of your feelings to get around them. Yeah, the power of your feelings. There is a lot of water around at the moment. Planets in water signs. You've got Moon in Cancer, Mercury in Pisces, Venus in Pisces, Saturn in Pisces. So if you want to be, you can really use your feelings to work your way forward. And additionally, Gemini, there's going to be something realistic about the way you are, and you're realistic about the constraints placed upon you by everything, by society. And it's kind of fitting in a way that today we're recovering from Trump's tariff statements, and you might think, well, what's that got to do with you? Well, it's probably got a lot to do with you. It's something happening in the world. And if you're a Gemini who is awake, maybe a woke Gemini, woke perhaps in a more traditional sense of a word, woke as in aware of how everything fits together, how what Trump says on the White House lawn impacts us all. You get it, and you get what's happening in the world, and you get how it might be impacting you. And that is going to possibly encourage you, to push things harder, to be more ambitious, to be more dynamic. And it's a kind of dynamism that it's not easygoing, not really. It's a little bit tough, and you know that things aren't easy. And if you take that approach, what can go wrong? And just never forget that Mercury might be in Pisces, but it is in mutual reception to Jupiter. And underlying all of this, there is a sense that things are going to be okay if you do the right things. Obviously, if you just go along with things, and you don't ask questions, and you just allow yourself to be buffeted by the tides of fate. Well, yeah, anything can happen, but it is a time for focus and structure, and if you take that approach, you're inevitably going to find that things start working your way, and however difficult things are, you will in the end be able to get to grips with it all. Cancer. Cancer, you're feeling okay. It's a first quarter moon coming up. I mean, you're really starting to feel that first quarter moon. We have the sun in Aries and the moon in Cancer. And so both the sun and the moon are in cardinal signs. The moon is in your sign. And normally when one thinks of squares, one thinks that they might be a little bit difficult. There's a little bit of stress there. Things might not work out. But I don't think that this first quarter moon is a problem. It actually puts you in a strong position. Because if you think about it, the sun in Aries is exalted, and the moon in Cancer is in its own sign, and the moon in Cancer is in your sign, and the sun in Aries is in an angle, and it's in an angle very much connected with career and success and getting noticed. So really, Cancer, you know what you need to do, and you can be dynamic, but you can also be really very sensitive, and your sensitivity will just get you through. And you're helped very much by the moon being in Cancer, because you understand yourself, you understand other people, and it's unlikely that you will make mistakes, and there is that dynamism with the moon square sun. So you can be sensitive and also dynamic. So if you want things to happen, they can happen. And if you're working today, then I think that moon square sun really should work in your favor. You'll have a definite sense of purpose, and you're going to be ambitious. And you're going to be ambitious in such a way that people aren't especially offended, and they'll probably do things your way. Now, the Mars is making a few aspects. Mars is making a sextile to Uranus. Mars is trine Venus. Mars is trine Saturn. So if you want to be Cancer, you can take things further. You're able to be someone who really is quite powerful and who gets their way. And the question you have, Cancer, is how far do you want to get your way? And there is always a consequence, and that might be where your sensitivity comes in. You're sensitive to what you can get away with, and you can maybe push things to the very limit, and then just know when to stop, when to back off, when to give other people a break. So at the moment, Cancer, you are a difficult person to overcome in a competitive situation. I think that if there is any form of competition, I'm fairly confident that you'll come out the winner. But winning for the sake of winning isn't what it's all about. You have to consider the after effects, and I do think that you'll know how far people can be pushed. And Venus is trine Mars, so it's an aspect that allows you to be fairly charismatic. That's an adjective one can use with Venus trine Mars, and quite a few of the 12 signs are in a position to benefit from the charisma that Venus Mars the Venus-Mars trine provides, not just today, but over the weekend. But the question is, are you actually going to avail yourself of it? I think you can. So, whatever you're planning on doing today, Cancer, I think there's every chance of you actually being successful. And also, what you're doing today shouldn't necessarily end, 5 o'clock this evening, 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon today. There perhaps can be some follow through. So what you start today, you may want to see it through into Saturday. So Saturday might be the weekend, but that doesn't mean you have to stop. Leo, you're trying to get some perspective on things. A lot is happening, and now you're trying to work it all out, and it's not always easy, and it may be best that you, to some extent, withdraw. You don't have to be in the center of things all the time. It's nice to get the attention, but sometimes you have to ask, what have you accomplished over the last week, for example? Have you been successful? Or have you been successful in a way that is, that you can be really happy with, or have you only been partially successful? So have another look at things, and don't feel right now that you have to initiate anything new. Not least because I don't think you're going to be in the mood, and also in the short term you may not be quite as powerful as you had been recently, and that just may be something to do with the moon being in Cancer. And moon in Cancer, yes, it does slow things down for you. And additionally, when you look at what's happening around you, it's happening too quickly, and so having a pause would be a good thing. But I'm not suggesting that you don't have any power. If you are being pushed and you feel you have to respond, then you are able to assert yourself, especially in a verbal sense. So if you really tell people what's on your mind, they will listen. If you feel that you have to be persuasive, then I think that you certainly can be. Your arguments will sound good, even if they're not logically perfect. You can get people to come round to your way of thinking. Again, if you have to. I think that it probably should be avoided. You don't want to be in a position where you're having to really interact with people, trying to show that you're better than them. That's not really what you want to be doing today. But if you feel it's necessary, then I do think that you can enjoy, some success. And planning could be important. Consider what you could do, and consider the next step. So think about next week, and however impatient you might feel, however anxious maybe you feel, there's nothing that you have to do. You can store up some of your tension and think about what you're going to be doing about it next week, when things will be better, things will be easier, and you will be helped by the fact that the moon at some stage will go into Leo. So over the weekend, the moon goes into Leo. When does the moon go into Leo? The moon goes into Leo on the 6th, so it goes into Leo on Sunday. So by the end of a weekend, you're going to feel that you're ready to get back on track, and you will perhaps be less interested in quiet contemplation, more interested in having an impact. So, as you move into the new week, as Sunday becomes Monday, you will have got your fire back. Virgo, you feel relatively content, I think. You feel that things are kind of going your way. You're aware that there are things wrong with the world, but you're not going to take it too personally. This is the world in which you're living, and you can manage. In fact, you can take into account what's wrong with the world, and it can just become part of your routine, part of your lifestyle even, and so you're quite flexible in that way, and you will understand other people's worries. That will be completely obvious, and one thing you need to do is not take anything to heart. Just because other people have problems and issues, it doesn't mean that you have to be burdened by it. You can have some detachment, but also some sympathy and sensitivity. So that kind of puts you in a good position. So make sure that you work out what can be done, and if something can't be done, if something cannot be done, then don't take it to heart. And if you do find that things are a little bit frustrating today, it's not your problem. It's other people, and some people just aren't ready, and you have to be patient. Let them work things out in their own way, and also be there for them. And with the moon in Cancer, that's something you really can do. And your social skills may not be dramatic, but they're good enough. And with Mercury making a conjunction to the North Node, you're able to attract people without trying too hard. And if you make yourself available so that people can be in touch if they want to be in touch, it may be a chance to develop new contacts. North Node is about contacts. It's not, it can be about a number of things, but North Node can be about social contacts and who we network with. And so Mercury conjunct Neptune in Pisces, Mercury conjunct the North Node in Pisces, it does allow you to, in a sort of vague kind of way, link up with people. You may not even have been planning to do it, but it just kind of happens, and that's the way it is. So Virgo, there's nothing really that you have to take to heart. You needn't get upset about anything. If you do feel that you're under pressure, it's not you that's under pressure. It's really it's other people that are feeling the pressure, and it's nice to be able to empathize, but you don't need to empathize too much. Libra, Venus is getting closer and closer to Saturn, and this Venus-Saturn conjunction may have an influence on how you come across, and you may come across as being ever so slightly cold, or certainly detached, aloof. And that doesn't sound nice, but maybe it's a good thing. You can't be there for everyone. You don't want to be super sensitive. You need to look after your own interests, and there's work to be done, and distraction is the last thing you need. And so on a positive note, this Venus-Saturn conjunction does allow you to create for yourself fairly firm boundaries. You know how far you can go, you know how far other people can go, and you are going to want to just keep a bit of distance, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and it might be good for you. If you get too close to people, then they might undermine you because you're having to deal with their issues, and you really shouldn't have to deal with them at all. And you've got your own things that you want to accomplish, and with that Venus conjunct Saturn, it may be that at the moment what you're actually looking for is order. And order is something you can create. It's almost sort of order out of chaos. You've got Venus and Saturn in Pisces. You could say, well, that is an ocean of chaos. And it's very difficult to know what's what, especially if you get too close to other people and their problems. But you are able to detach yourself. And once you start detaching yourself, you start to realize, what's important, what's not important, what is your domain, what is someone else's domain, and you can make those distinctions. And yes, you can create order. Now, Venus is not just making a conjunction to Saturn. Venus is also making a trine to Mars. And this Venus trine Mars does say something about you and other people. While it's true that, broadly speaking, you are or can be detached, Venus trine Mars also suggests that when you want to be, you can be pleasant and also dynamic, certainly looking after yourself, but in any social interaction, you can come over well if you make the effort, if you want to make the effort. And that's especially the case with close relationships. So close relationships with that Venus trine Mars can be worthwhile, and you may see someone in a positive light, provided they're the right person. You don't want the wrong people to mess you up, but the right person can really be helpful, and you may actually be able to benefit from another person's strength of purpose. And that might especially be the case when it comes to your ambitions. You've got ambitions, we've all got ambitions, and if you want to realize your ambitions, you don't necessarily have to do everything on your own. It just may be that there is someone out there who really can be very, very helpful, and you listen to what they've got to say, and you will know if they are a supportive influence. But do make those distinctions. Some people can be great, but a lot of people are just a distraction. Worse, they could undermine you. And so you can't be all things to all people, and you should pare down your social diary to an absolute minimum. Scorpio, Mars is very much in focus at the moment, and of course, Scorpio, Mars is your ruler, and Mars at the moment is sextile Uranus. Mars is also trine Venus. It's also trine Saturn. So Mars is kind of everywhere. It's a planet that I've already talked about it quite recently. I think in my video for Thursday, I talked about Mars. So Mars is getting a lot of attention right now, and that indicates to me, Scorpio, that you are to a great extent at the center of things. You may not always feel that you're at the center of things, but you are. And you have the ability right now to make things happen. And you can make things happen for better or for worse. So, one aspect we have today is Mars sextile Uranus. So Mars represents you, and Uranus represents what you could do if you wanted to. And Uranus is the planet of revolutions. And if you want to create your own revolution with Saturn's with Mars sextile Uranus, in fact Saturn is also sextile Uranus, you certainly can. Okay, when I say revolution, of course, I'm talking about a personal revolution or a revolution that affects the people close to you. But if you want change, you know that one situation has come to an end or should have come to an end, you can take action and you'll be very clear about it, and you may even be a little bit brutal about it. I mean, you don't have to be too brutal, but if change is required, what can you do about it? And the best way to enact change with Mars sextile Uranus is to go for something fairly sudden. If you go for gradual change, then there's plenty of scope for that change to be frustrated. People might come up with reasons why you can't do it, and you'll have to reply, and in the end you get nowhere. It's best to have a certain drama there, and that way it's just difficult to stop you, because fundamentally, Scorpio, you are in a strong position, and at the same time Mars is trine Venus. Mars is also trine Saturn. So Venus trine Mars, okay, that Venus trine Mars and that Mars trine Saturn, those aspects are exact over the weekend, but they're close enough. And you are able to present yourself very powerfully. You come over as someone who is appealing, who's got something to offer, and who really can't be ignored. And it's not about you pushing people around or just telling them what to do. It's about you demonstrating what can be done and actually coming over as a breath of fresh air. I mean, I know that Venus-Mars trine is in water signs, but it still might feel like a breath of fresh air. It's a different approach, and it may actually be an exciting approach. It may not be too exciting to you because you're so familiar with it, but what's familiar to you isn't necessarily familiar to other people. And if you present yourself, your core self, who you are, and your priorities to other people, it comes over as being dramatic and maybe refreshing as well. And whatever changes you try to bring about, you're actually able to solidify them, make sure that they remain in place. And that possibly has something to do with the fact that Mars is trine Saturn. So Saturn is a planet of discipline and control. So with Mars making this trine to Saturn, you are able to be in control. And if you have made a decision about something, then you're not going to back down, or rather you don't have to back down. And it's not about you imposing anything on anyone, you being a little dictator. It's not about that. It's about you being recognized, you recognizing yourself, and also recognizing that you've got something to offer. And when people realize what you've got to offer, they're going to want to be part of it, and they just may need a little bit of a push to so that they realize that your way is the best way. Sagittarius. things may feel a little bit serious. When you look at the main aspects going on at the moment, we have Mars involved, Uranus, Saturn, and these are not Sagittarian friendly planets, or at least they're not planets that you feel necessarily very familiar with, especially because they're in the negative signs. You've got Mars in Cancer, you've got Saturn in Pisces, you've got Uranus in Taurus. These are energies that you don't feel 100% familiar with. I mean, you can be familiar with them, you can get to grips with them, but it may take a little bit of time. And so, Sagittarius, it might be best if you don't feel that you have to be a direct part of it all. At least not to begin with, because it just takes you time to familiarize with it and familiarize yourself with it. And you're also becoming aware that things are a little more complicated than you'd realized. So we had a new moon at the end of last month, and that new moon was in Aries. That's great. It was a great new moon for you, and you were able to hopefully tune into who you are, what you could create, why you are so special and so unique. That's how the new moon could have worked out. But now we've got the first quarter moon, so we've got the sun in Aries square moon in Cancer, and so that initial impulse of the new moon, which was so positive, so optimistic, is being challenged. You're seeing that it's slightly more complicated than you'd realized. It's not a deal breaker, but it does need some thought, and that's maybe what should be going on. You're just thinking how this can happen, how this can work out, and you might even think that your overall strategy needs to be adjusted a bit, because things have become more complicated, and if you try to be simple and upfront and straightforward, that might not fully work out. Now, as far as other people are concerned, Mercury is now very close to the North Node in Pisces, and with that Mercury conjunct the North Node in Pisces, there are people out there who really can help you. And when I say out there, it's probably more about people you already know very well. And don't underestimate anyone. It can be a case often of, familiarity breeds contempt. You're with someone for a long time, you know them very well, so you reach the conclusion that they're not going to be any use, because you don't just know them in a positive way, you know them in a negative way. You see their flaws, and are they worth bothering with? But you don't want to take anyone for granted. Especially people you know well. They've always got something extra to offer if you just give them a chance. And you may want to talk about some of your concerns. I think you do have a few concerns right now. Nothing is entirely straightforward, and you may need a little bit of support and encouragement. This first quarter moon, it is a little bit challenging, but it doesn't last forever. And a few days' time, the moon will be out of Cancer into Leo, and this may be a chance to sort of get things back on the road. But I'm not saying it's going to be a difficult day or a difficult weekend or a difficult Saturday. It's just that you maybe need to slow down a bit, and you need to have a sort of pause for thought and just reconsider your strategy and your short-term plans. Capricorn, it's quite a high energy day I mean, in fact, Saturday's pretty high energy. Maybe the whole weekend is high energy. And, one reason for that is that Mars is trine Saturn. Also, Uranus is trine Saturn. So Saturn, your ruler, is really getting hit. But getting hit, I think, in a fairly positive way, in a way that is enlivening. And so you're the one who can actually make things happen. And there might then be a sense of responsibility. If something is going to change, then it may be down to you to make it happen. Saturn sextile Uranus. Uranus is the planet of explosions, the planet of revolutions. It's making a fortunate aspect to Saturn, and there could be something about you that is explosive in a Capricorn kind of way. You decide something needs to change, and it changes. Do you want something to change? Do you perhaps believe it's impossible to create change? Well, Capricorn, it's a time when you can make things happen, and people are going to listen to you. And, even if they don't listen to you, you can make things happen. But, I think in most cases, people aren't going to really defy you. You're going to be very clear. And additionally, we've got Mars making a trine to Saturn. And so Mars is a dynamic planet. It's making a trine to Saturn. So that allows you to use your energy to decide what you want to do, and you'll know how much energy to put in order to get the results that you're looking for. And you're going to be helped even further by the fact that the moon is in Cancer. So moon in Cancer, moon is in your opposite sign. So what that means is that you'll have an ability to, understand other people and also understand other people's weaknesses. And that way it's just going to be that much easier to make things happen on your terms. And so, don't underestimate your psychological abilities. Maybe Capricorn is not a sign that one normally associates with psychology. Perhaps you'd be looking to Pisces or Cancer, but Capricorn, right now, you have good psychological insights, and these psychological insights should really help you work with the human material around you. Though, if anyone really is standing in your way, they're refusing to budge, you have what it takes to move them, and it's through a blast of energy that you can just produce if need be. And it will almost be a little bit it will almost be unexpected. People just won't think that you would do it. But if people are thinking you won't do it, you actually are quite capable of doing it, of going all the way. And some Capricorns can be extremists. So if you've got an extremist streak, that extremist streak may be starting to come out into the open. And when you think of some of the stock phrases that Capricorns sometimes use, Mao Zedong was a Capricorn, by the way. So was Richard Nixon. Stalin is not a Capricorn, by the way. Also, that was really distressing. That Stalin's not a Capricorn. I wrote this book in the in the 90s, Life, Love and Destiny, and I talked about examples of Capricorns, and I said that Capricorn was, I used Stalin as an example of Capricorn, and at the time that's what people thought, but he really was a Capricorn. And then later, someone in Georgia was looking through church records, and in fact, Stalin was a Sagittarius. And I was absolutely gutted to find that Stalin was a Sagittarius. But yeah, Stalin wasn't a Capricorn. But Mao Zedong and Richard Nixon were Capricorns. And, with Capricorn, you might be thinking stock phrases like, the ends justify the means. You can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. And that can be a Capricorn view. And maybe at the moment with Saturn sextile Uranus, Mars trine Saturn, you might feel that. Okay, you might not be that kind of Capricorn, but some Capricorns can be tough, and if something has to be done, it has to be done, and that's it. Aquarius, in some ways, you would like to have a quiet, uncomplicated day where everything follows a particular plan. You may not want surprises, but the question is, are you going to get your wish? Saturn at the moment is making a sextile to Uranus, and Saturn is your ruler. Now, even if you think that Uranus is the ruler of Aquarius, you've still got Saturn sextile Uranus. It's going to affect you one way or another. And this outer planet aspect, I would guess that you are feeling it. And Uranus is a planet which is about dramatic change. You can't be happy with the way things are, not entirely. You might like to be happy, but with Saturn sextile Uranus, you may feel somewhat restless. You like not to feel restless, but you are. And however much you try, you just feel that actually things have to change. And yeah, it would be nice to have a quiet day, but it just may not be an option. And instead you can try your hardest to stabilize things and to work out what is important to you, but you must be prepared to contemplate change and work out what do you have to do, what do you have to say. And additionally, Mars is making a trine to Saturn. So that Mars trine Saturn is not exact today, it's exact over the weekend, but still, it's an important aspect. You are feeling it, and it makes you, to begin with, a little frustrated, but it does give you enormous self-discipline. So perhaps you should put it all together and say, well, you can't have an entirely quiet day. You've got things to do. There are things you want to change, but you can do it in such a way that minimizes the collateral damage. There's always going to be collateral damage, isn't there? If you're trying to make something happen, and there's going to be resistance. Some things have to be moved out of the way, and not everyone's going to be happy, but you just have to go through with it. So Aquarius, don't be satisfied with the way things are. You would like to be satisfied with the way things are, but I don't think that is fundamentally an option. And you might give the impression, or you might have the impression that you are a little bit ruthless over the course of the day and unfeeling. No, I wouldn't have said you were unfeeling, because Venus is making a conjunction to Saturn. So if we take Saturn as your ruler and Venus in Pisces as a planet that is often connected with relationships, but it's a softer influence. And in fact, that Venus conjunct Saturn may be a bit of a softener. It may allow you to be more flexible when it comes to dealing with people who deserve sympathy. So if someone is pleasant, they mean well, and they're around you, then I think you can respond. You can respond well to them, and it's probably the case that if someone is on your wavelength, and if someone means well, you're going to be nice to them, and you can be extra nice to them, and you can be supportive of that relationship. On the other hand, if someone is an irritant and is annoying you, I don't think you're going to be really in the mood for making a special effort to make anyone happy if you don't believe that person deserves to be made happy. So, yeah, you can be tough if need be, but you don't have to be unnecessarily tough. And I don't think you're going to be unfair today. I think you'll give people what they deserve, and that's the best method of handling today, Friday. And you shouldn't see Friday today as being a discrete unit. Really, what happens today, Friday, persists into Saturday. So Friday and Saturday should really be treated as the same day, and you should be ready to continue with whatever you start today, continue through until Sunday. Well, maybe until Sunday, certainly through until Saturday, and be ready to see things through until the end. Don't stop halfway, because that would be a shame. It might be a wasted effort, a wasted opportunity. Pisces. The moon is in Cancer, and when the moon is in Cancer, from a Pisces perspective, you feel pretty good. All things being equal, you feel that you can be yourself, and you broadly understand what's happening around you, and if you want to enjoy yourself, that should be okay. But you do have to consider everything else going on, and you may be influenced by wider events, and it might be the after effects, for example, of Trump's tariffs, or there might be something else in the world going on that you don't like the sound of, and that might upset your peace of mind. And when you try to actually function in this world and try to understand it, it just may feel that you're being blocked. And the question is, why are you feeling that you're blocked? Probably if you just stay in one place and you forget what's happening out there, you'll be fine. But as soon as you start talking to people, even reading the newspapers, watching the news, that's when you feel blocked. And it's really a psychological state. And you feel that you've seen this before, and you're also aware that some people just aren't moving on. And may even be that you're not moving on. And you're almost transfixed, looking at something, looking at some horror. It's not your horror, it's a horror from outside, but it's still there. So Pisces, perhaps you shouldn't take things too seriously, and you should just concentrate on what you can do and what's important to you. And that might sound a little bit selfish, but it's probably appropriate. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, Venus is starting to make a conjunction to Saturn, and this conjunction isn't quite there yet, but Venus and Saturn, they are just over a degree apart, And so with Venus conjunct Saturn, that may say something about how you present yourself, and that also might be challenging. So, with Saturn in Pisces, you are someone who at the moment is taking yourself relatively seriously. But Venus conjunct Saturn is kind of asking you to provide a little bit of flexibility, and it's asking you to make a little bit of an effort when it comes to possibly another person. Might be about a relationship, and you don't necessarily want to make the effort, but that Venus conjunct Saturn is asking you to make the effort. And it's not just that Venus is conjunct Saturn. We also have a Venus-Mars trine, and that Venus-Mars trine could affect you because Venus is in Pisces, Mars is in Cancer. And so that Venus trine Mars can allow you to see things in a more positive light through other people, perhaps, or by enjoying yourself with other people. And in fact, enjoyment may actually be quite important. It may be the antidote to some of your negativity, because there is a lot of negativity flying around, and it's not just a Pisces thing. And by doing something you enjoy that is fun, then things can be, a whole lot better. And I'm not just talking about Friday, because the situation astrologically on Saturdays is fairly similar to Friday. The moon is still in Cancer, and this Venus trine Mars and Mars trine Saturn. Those two aspects are things that you really feel today as well as tomorrow. That Mars trine Saturn. That might be another thing to consider. And so with Mars trine Saturn, that does give you discipline and focus. But again, don't take yourself too seriously. Try to be disciplined and focused in terms of something you enjoy. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. So it's now time to look at the I Ching. And I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was number 7, which is the army. And I do find the army a rather difficult hexagram to interpret, because it's talking about something so impersonal, like the army. You think of military force, and what has military force got to do with most of us? Well, I suppose one could be in the army, but otherwise it doesn't seem especially relevant. So we kind of have to sort of unpack, what that might actually mean. And the army does talk about a group and being part of a group. And so we might feel our role in the group as being sort of more important than usual. And it's also about defense. And one way of looking at this I Ching is to see it as passive defense. It's quite a passive hexagram in a way, because you've got, if you analyze it, you've got the top three lines are all broken, so it's a very receptive upper trigram, and the bottom trigram is the abyss. And so we don't defend ourselves if we don't have to, but we've got this inner power that is just under the surface, and it just doesn't manifest unless it has to manifest. And so some of us might feel a bit threatened that there are things going on that we don't understand, that they know could have an impact on us. And so we have to work out what our best response actually is. It could be something happening locally, or it could be something happening globally. For example, the impact of tariffs, how that affects the economy and how the economy is going to affect us. So it is a defensive posture. And we have the fourth line moving. And with the fourth line moving, it does seem that some of us do feel that we are involved in a struggle, that we have to fight for our own interests, that we perhaps have to take the initiative. And that fourth line is about retreat. We go so far in a particular direction, but we stop. And we should avoid the battle. So if we feel there's a battle coming up, a conflict, an argument, we should pull back. This is not the time to be having a battle. And so withdraw, retreat. And it's completely honourable. And so this is kind of indicating that there is some danger. A danger that we're very aware of. And so, the question is, how do we deal with this danger? And our first impulse might be to actually confront the danger head on, but I don't think that is the right approach. Now, we have the fourth line from the bottom moving, and because of that, we move to a different hexagram, and the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 40, which is deliverance. And deliverance is about escape. So it might be the case that actually we're in a bad position, or we're moving into a situation that could become dangerous, or we could have committed ourselves to something and we're having second thoughts. And deliverance is about recognizing the danger and escaping, and we successfully escape. So today, consider what you're involved in. Remember, this is only a reading for one day, so can one day be that dramatic? But consider what you're involved with and look forward to see where the dangers lie. And you might just come to the conclusion that it's not just a good idea to avoid a conflict, but actually to quit the scene, because there is an escape route. It is open, but it won't be open forever. And that's it with the I Ching. And now I want to go back to the astrology. And before I look at Trump's Liberation Day speech and his tariff announcements, I wanted to look at just one midpoint aspect, and that is the fact that Uranus is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So if we look at the positions of planets today, I don't have to have a sort of a special chart set for any particular time of any particular event. But if we look at today's chart and we look at Uranus, Uranus is exactly on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And it's not just any aspect. It's the fact that, firstly, it's a conjunction to the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Additionally, it's two sextiles. Mars and Saturn are trine, and Uranus is sextile Mars, Uranus is sextile Saturn. That is dramatic. And we shouldn't get fooled by the fact that we've got trines and sextiles involved. Doesn't mean to say that it's going to be a good thing. I would see that aspect as a negative. And I've already looked at what Witte said, just to remind you about what Witte said, which I know I've already read it, but I just want to say it one more time. So Alfred Witte, in his rules for planetary pictures, remember, he says, sudden actions which separate, violent separation and death, sudden death. And so things happening which we weren't expecting. To give you another view, we can look at what Reinhold Ebertin says in the combination of stellar influences. And so he says, I think he's slightly more positive, but he says, extraordinary and unusual powers of resistance, the ability to give as well as to take under provocation, people responding to tariffs maybe, the inclination to apply brute force, a test of nervous strength, intervention by higher power or by providence, a sudden illness, a sudden accident, separation, or case of death. So this Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, has been hanging around for some time. It's not just something new. It's the last couple of days it's been around, and I think that very much feels like the atmosphere we're in, what kind of environment we're experiencing. And we might still expect things to happen which might not be to do with Trump and his tariffs. There could be a disaster that unfolds with Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And as far as us as individuals are concerned, we do have to be, we have to be careful. It's a really heavy midpoint combination, made stronger by the fact that you've got these trines and sextiles involved with it. And I just wanted to just look at a couple of people who actually have Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. I'm not going to spend long on this, but you might find this useful. So if you're in Britain, David Lammy, the British Foreign Secretary, has got Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So there's his Mars, there's his Saturn, and so Uranus is square his Mars-Saturn midpoint. So someone with Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint is a little bit impulsive, and David Lammy has been impulsive. He said some, over the last couple of years ago, he said some pretty bad things about Donald Trump, and now he's Foreign Secretary. Was it really wise to have David Lammy as British Foreign Secretary? But it may also say something about his behaviour as Foreign Secretary. And maybe because David Lammy has Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, he's going to be sensitive to the Uranus on the Mars-Saturn energy that we have right now. And another politician who has Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint is German foreign minister. I think she's still foreign minister. I thought after the election she might go, but as far as I know, she's still in place. And she has got, there's her Mars and her Saturn. And so if you do the calculations, Uranus is conjunct her Mars-Saturn midpoint. And I do think, from what I know about her, that describes her very well. She's someone who is enthusiastic about pursuing NATO and NATO's war against Russia. She really is very gung-ho about it. Surprising for a green, but she's got Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. It may be that violence and weaponry are really attractive to her, and she, that's what she's interested in. And once she's involved in a battle, she wants to just carry on with it. But she seems to be a little bit unstable. I mean, she's not a kind of person you really want as foreign secretary. And talking about foreign minister, so that means that the British foreign minister at the moment and the German foreign minister both have Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. With Lammy, it's Uranus square the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and also with Baerbock, it's Uranus conjunct the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And another politician who has been in the news a lot recently is the Canadian Prime Minister. So Canadian Prime Minister, there is his Mars, and there's his Saturn, and if you work it through, Uranus is he's got a Mars-Uranus conjunction, and if you work it through, you'll find that Uranus is square his Mars-Saturn midpoint. So so far, Carney has given the impression, at least as described by the mainstream media, as being a safe pair of hands, someone who's going to normalise things, the adult in the room, the man who knows about economics. But one wonders how that that Uranus on a Mars-Saturn midpoint is really going to work out. And it may be that because of the pressure he's now going to be under as Canadian Prime Minister, we may start to see that Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And that may be about him wanting to escalate even further with the war against Ukraine. Of course, he's now got issues with America. So I'm not convinced that that's great, having these politicians who are involved in international negotiations having Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. They may be attracting things. And two non-politicians who have Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint are Piers Morgan, the journalist. So you can see he's got Uranus square his Mars-Saturn midpoint. And he is someone that is always sort of picking a fight. He's quite confrontational. I don't think I need to say anything more about that. And finally, Stockton Rush of OceanGate fame, the one who, OceanGate infamy, who took that submarine down to the Titanic with its carbon fiber hull, which collapsed. So that could be another way in which Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint works, being very headstrong, wanting to just go for it, regardless. He knows best. It can be very stubborn. So there's his Mars. Where's his Mars-Saturn midpoint gone? There's the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So he looks as if he's got Uranus opposition his Mars-Saturn midpoint. Now, 4 events which have Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. This might be more relevant if we're thinking about what might be happening at the moment. And one event is the Fukushima nuclear accident in 2011, which took place when Uranus was on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So there's Uranus, there's Mars, there's Saturn, and Uranus is square the Mars-Saturn midpoint. By the way, when I'm looking at these aspects, I use 1 degree orb for aspects of the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Because if you use orbs which are more than 1 degree, you're just going to find that you've got so many examples of an aspect that it all becomes a bit meaningless. And I think in astrology in general, you should try to keep your orbs low, and certainly with midpoints, I try to keep them at 1 degree. So Fukushima, death, Uranus, you could say Uranus has a connection with nuclear power, death and destruction through a nuclear event. And another nuclear event was the Windscale fire on October the 10th, 1957. And this was the worst nuclear incident probably in Western Europe, when the Windscale nuclear power plant, it caught fire and belched radioactive material over what is now Cumbria. I think it was probably Cumberland then. And so, I mean, it's difficult to know precisely when the fire started, but you were looking at about a nuclear pile when it got too hot, when something caught fire. And there's Mars and Saturn. So this is another example of Uranus being square the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So we've got 2 serious nuclear events that took place with Uranus aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And something more historic is the Tea Act. The passing of a Tea Act in Britain on the May the 10th, 1773, which, of course, imposed a duty on tea, which the American colonists didn't really appreciate. And, of course, that would have led to the Boston Tea Party. And the Tea Act was one of the many reasons why the American colonists decided that they'd had enough of Britain. And so when the Tea Act was passed, Uranus was again square the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So there's something rather sort of revolutionary about this, and this of course sort of happened just before Uranus was discovered. So Uranus was discovered, I think, 1781. But that is another way in which Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint could work. And finally, the inauguration of George Bush Junior on January the 20th, 2001. And there's Saturn, and there's a very wide Mars-Saturn opposition, and you might think that opposition is too wide, but Uranus is halfway between that opposition of Mars and Saturn. So Uranus on the Mars-Saturn is about death and destruction, and it's about explosions, and you might have your questions about who was responsible for it, but that seems to herald 9/11, and the defining event of George Bush's first term in office was 9/11. And so I think that 9/11 event was shown in that inauguration chart. And now I want to move on and look at Trump's Liberation Day, his speech at the White House, where he imposed a huge number of tariffs. Remember, I'm not an economist, so it's difficult for me to judge whether or not they're a good thing. I'm not going to give an opinion. Clearly, everyone interviewed or who comments in mainstream media is saying that these tariffs are an absolute disaster, but Trump doesn't know what he's doing. Maybe he doesn't know what he's doing. Maybe it's just a negotiating ploy. I don't know. So here is his Liberation Day speech, or his comments. And so I've set it for 4 o'clock Washington DC. So the markets had just closed, and markets had been up. People were expecting that they wouldn't be so bad, and then they were just they were absolutely as bad as expected and worse. And so the moon is making a conjunction to Jupiter. And that moon conjunct Jupiter, you might say, is quite a fortunate conjunction. Now, it wasn't fortunate in terms of the market's immediate response, but there might be an indication here that what Trump did wasn't necessarily as crazy as it sounds or as it feels, because we don't really know what the after effects are going to be. And additionally, the Sun was making a sextile to Jupiter. So Sun in Aries making a sextile to Jupiter. The Moon is making a sextile to the Sun as well. So if you just look at Moon, Jupiter and the Sun, it's not actually such a bad chart. And maybe we shouldn't necessarily panic about it. Maybe Trump knows what he's doing. Maybe luck is on his side. And you look at that Moon-Jupiter conjunction, Liberation Day. I mean, I'm not saying it is Liberation Day, but Trump, the showman, he kind of has picked the event very well. Moon conjunct Jupiter, and of course Uranus is exactly on the midheaven. Liberation from tariffs. The American Colossus Unchained Liberation. By the way, I must make it clear, I'm not giving an opinion here. I'm not expressing my political views. I've no idea whether or not these tariffs are a good or a bad thing. But there is something in that chart to be a little bit optimistic about, though of course it's not so good that the South Node is on the second house cusp of money, and so that does make it a little bit difficult. But the headline signatures of this chart are actually not so bad, and they're actually quite exciting. And we can certainly see liberation in this chart. So then there is a question, what was going on with Trump when he did this? So here is Trump's chart. So where's Trump? I've got Trump's chart somewhere here. So if we look at Donald Trump's chart, here it is. What was he experiencing when it was his big moment? And here it is. So we've got Trump's chart in the middle and the Liberation Day planets on the outer wheel. Now I should remind you what I've already discussed so far in this video is that it did happen when Uranus was on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So, we can question, what does it mean for Uranus to be on the Mars-Saturn midpoint? Well, the tariffs thing is a perfect example of Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, just causing a whole load of destruction. Though, we don't quite know where this destruction is going to lead. So Trump has his midheaven at 24, 22 Taurus. So at the time of sort of Liberation Day, Uranus is right on his midheaven. So he's had this Uranus on the midheaven transit for the last year or more. I don't know when it started. Yeah, the last year or more. And so this is another manifestation of it. Some people thought last year before the election that Uranus on the midheaven was going to be about him losing the election. Not how it worked out. And here is him doing something incredibly dramatic with Uranus on his midheaven. And this Moon-Jupiter conjunction, around 14, 15, 16, 14 to 16 Gemini, relatively close to his Gemini planets. He's got his North Node at 20 Gemini, so 2048 Gemini. So Jupiter is moving towards his North Node. The Moon is is fairly close to a conjunction to his North Node. So you could say, if you take the North Node as what he should be doing, the positive direction in his life, that it is maybe absolutely right for him to be making this dramatic announcement, even though mainstream media is certainly of the view that it's all a complete disaster. And Trump, additionally, he has Jupiter at 1727 Libra. And so Jupiter is starting to move to a trine of his own Jupiter, and so is the Moon. And so Jupiter trine Jupiter, this is the release, this is his personal liberation. So it's not necessarily as bad as it seems, at least from Trump's perspective. And Mars is at 2413 Cancer. So he's got Mars on his Venus-Saturn midpoint. Now, it's interesting that Trump has a Venus-Saturn conjunction in his natal chart. There's a Venus-Saturn conjunction at the time he made this announcement, and even more so, this Venus-Saturn conjunction when he made the announcement was 2 degrees separated it. In his own natal chart, he's got Venus-Saturn conjunction with 2 degrees separating it, with 2 degrees of separation. So he's really picking up on this Venus-Saturn conjunction. Now, you could say that Venus-Saturn conjunction is about destroying the economy, if you take Venus as being about money. You could also say that Venus is about foreign affairs, relationships, how America gets on with other countries. And again, Venus-Saturn, it's pretty destructive there. And going back to his inauguration, so here's Trump's inauguration, and comparing the inauguration chart with his Liberation Day announcement, there is a Mars return. So Mars, when he was inaugurated, was at 2424 Cancer, and Mars was at 2413 Cancer at the time he started making his speech. And of course, Mars is now moving towards the IC of the regime at that time when Trump became president. So definitely links here with the inauguration chart. And then there is the chart of the United States. I mean, this surely is a big deal for the United States. Trump's big announcement, and so when Trump made his speech, Mars was at 20, or started when he walked onto the White House lawn or whatever. Mars was at 2413 Cancer. The United States' Mercury, on July the 4th, 1776 at 5:10 p.m., is at 2412 Cancer. So Mars was exactly conjunct the United States' Mercury. This really is an indication that the United States' chart really is working. And Mercury is about communication and violent communication. That is Trump making his big speech, and so that really is a dramatic demonstration of astrology working. I wonder also, and this is a question I've often had with astrology: can you actually look at cusps of Placidus cusps and have transits to Placidus cusps? I'm not convinced you can, but the cusp of, if we take 5:10 p.m. as the time that the Declaration of Independence came into being, the cusp of the ninth house is 2453 Leo. And you could say that the ninth house represents relations with foreign countries and foreign governments. Uranus, at the time he made his speech, was at 2456 or 2450 Taurus. So Uranus was exactly square the United States' ninth house Placidus cusp. And so that certainly fits what actually happened. He made the speech and caused complete chaos in terms of the United States' foreign relations. And then there is the descendant. Now, the descendant one often associates with war. And in the past, when the United States has gone to war, the descendant has very often been activated. And with tariffs, it is a kind of a war, isn't it? But no one's going to be directly killed. And this Moon-Jupiter conjunction, which I talked about earlier, which is such a defining theme of his Liberation Day speech or his Liberation Day announcement, is right on his descendant. In fact, the Mars-Uranus midpoint, because America has Mars-Uranus on the seventh house cusp, and that's can be seen in many ways. I like to see it in terms of projection. America sees terrorism everywhere except within itself, Mars-Uranus conjunction. Especially take the view, for example, that America blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and helped destroy the German economy. But, that's for another time. The moon is exactly on the Mars-Uranus conjunction. Moon is exactly on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. Jupiter's pretty close to the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So it was an event that really stirred things up, and some would say was an act of war. Now, will these tariffs be the end of the economy? Will it bring a massive recession? At this stage, I think the answer is probably no. And, one reason for this relates to the chart of, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. It's Jupiter-Saturn square. So it just feels to me that we're at the wrong stage of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle to be thinking about some global recession, or at least a recession as far as the United States is concerned. Very often you have big economic meltdowns at the time of the Jupiter-Saturn opposition. And the first quarter square between the Jupiter and Saturn, in other words, we had the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2020, and now we're coming on to the square. That square can be a crisis, but it's often a crisis that is relatively short-lived. And actually, following that square, you often see a period of economic growth, certainly stock market growth. So the complete pessimism is, I don't know, I don't think it's necessarily correct. And one thing about this Jupiter-Saturn square is that it happens several times because Jupiter and Saturn go retrograde. But here is a chart of the Jupiter-Saturn square for June the 15th, 2025. I have shown this chart before, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself. But this square happens with Saturn in Aries square Jupiter in Cancer. And so Jupiter is moving into Cancer, is about to move into Cancer. The United States has a lot of Cancerian planets. And this is when the Jupiter-Saturn cycle that started in 2020 gets underway. And it tends to be a fortunate time economically. I mean, it's not always the case, but it's a waxing Jupiter-Saturn. It's the waxing part of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. And so my feelings at the moment are that in spite of all the negativity and pessimism about tariffs and what they're going to do, Jupiter's position is not going to get much worse. I mean, I had thought actually with Jupiter being in mutual reception to Mercury, that might help. But looking at what the markets are doing at the moment, that doesn't really seem to be the case. But I'm thinking that as we move into the summer, as Jupiter moves into Cancer, we may see some improvement, and that things may not quite be as bad as they seem. But maybe I need to do some more research. And just because we see a pattern in astrology, this first quarter of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle tending in the past to have been positive. You think about previous times, the mid-1980s, that's when the Reagan boom started, the mid-2000s, around 2005, 2006, things were looking pretty good. But maybe this time it's going to be different. But I will try to look at it in further detail in another video, and hopefully that video will become sooner rather than later. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.